Hey neighbor, welcome back to 7 on Sunday. About 5 years ago, I made an episode of the show centered around bands that everyone forgot about. You guys really seemed to like that one, so today, maybe just a few years late, I'm breaking out round 2, this time with an emphasis on 2000s bands. This list was designed with the mainstream music fan in mind. At one point, every 2000s band featured here was really successful in terms of charting and building up a large fan base. That clearly didn't last forever, as many of these might be names you haven't thought about or heard in ages, but looking into their falls from grace, that sparked a lot of curiosity in me. Like, how do some bands from the 2000s remain just as popular as they were, but others just can't seem to keep a foot in the door? Did they break up, burn out, struggle to get along, get dropped by a label, or simply get left behind as the industry shifted gears? Every story has a different arc, and some of them are better left in the past, but not all of them, since I actually find a lot of these groups on the list to be underrated in a modern setting. This video is sponsored by Dragon City. Dragon City is a free-to-play game available on Android and iOS, featuring hundreds of different, you guessed it, dinosaurs. I'm kidding, obviously. It's Dragon City, we're collecting dragons here, so click the top link down below to play the game for free. The simple, intuitive gameplay makes it easy for anyone to start playing and breeding dragons. Breed 2 dragons together and boom, you've got yourself a new one. From there, you can feed and train your dragons, ultimately leading them to exciting battles that really turn up the heat. Or you could just stare and admire your mythical dragons and whisper compliments softly into your phone's speaker, although it hasn't proved itself to be very effective for me so far, so maybe keep breeding, feeding, and fighting. With multiple PvP modes available to let you battle your friends in real time anytime you want, or the exciting new events that get added in the game every single week, there's tons of dragon-themed adventures waiting just around the corner. Click that top link in the description down below to download Dragon City for free. If you use my custom link, you know you want to help support the channel anyways, you'll get a special reward of 30,000 gold, 15,000 food, and 10 gems, but make sure you've got the latest version of the game or else you're not going to get the rewards. Thanks again Dragon City for sponsoring the video, now on with the rest of the episode. Little known fact, Metro Station is not only the name of something that you would see in public transportation systems, it's also the name of a scene band that unfortunately could not have hit at a better time. The MySpace era was exploding, and Metro Station were essentially the poster boys for the late 2000s. They had hits like 17 Forever, Kelsey, and of course the one that even the young kids today probably know, Shake It. It's seen a resurgence, but most people don't know anything about the band, they just know the song. Real talk, we all know that they had some bops, Shake It still goes hard, and I could definitely go out on a limb to defend a few of the other singles, but it's just that. They saw success with the singles, but the albums never did well, and after their debut, things definitely didn't pick up. Mason Musso and Trace Cyrus never had much chemistry beyond the singles, and I mean that in terms of songwriting and of course vocals too. It can get downright painful and cringy on some of the deep cuts if you go explore their first album, and it honestly didn't get better on some of these reunions they did, because behind the scenes there must have been a hell of a lot of infighting, because Trace Cyrus and Mason Musso as Metro Station, they literally will not stop breaking up and reuniting. People, let me just reassure you right now, you are not missing out if you haven't listened to the new stuff. I listened to their album Savior and the other EPs and even their most recent single, I Hate Society, so you don't have to. Metro Station quite literally had an expiration date placed on their foreheads from the second their first album landed, and they were never meant to go past 2010. They keep pushing it, they keep coming back, but that doesn't mean that society wants them.
Good night, you're embarrassing, it's a good night.
My number 6 pick is a little bit tougher to admit because it's Hot Hot Heat, a Canadian indie rock band that I actually like quite a bit. I can definitely admit that they were forgotten by the general public, and that's fine. They were always meant to be a bit more niche, but they blew up in such a way with their second album, Elevator, that they started crossing over in terms of charting success in the UK and of course the States as well. The problem was that beyond some of the singles and after their first 2 albums, which are pretty solid overall, I think they started to make material that felt watered down, and you could definitely see where they were getting their influences, and it became so apparent apparent that a lot of people lost interest by the time that Happiness Limited released in 2008. I do think this is one of those unfortunate circumstances where the band were cut off by their label, they were under-promoted for that third album, I don't think the budget was there, and that's weird because Elevator, they definitely proved themselves with that album. I got into them because of the single Middle of Nowhere that was playing on Fuse. They got heavy rotation and they saw positive reactions from both fans and critics, but the label didn't push album 3 and that made album 4 go even further down. While nothing ever struck a chord with the masses quite like their debut Make Up the Breakdown or even Elevator, I think their final 2 albums were a lot better, especially that 2016 self-titled, which was essentially a swan song. There were good tracks on there. It showed that they had heart and stamina, but they just couldn't make it because being a band at that point, it didn't seem feasible. They had faded from the public eye, and those last 2 albums, they virtually charted nowhere.
Coin operated boy, all the other real ones that I destroy cannot hold a candle.
A dark cabaret punk duo? Indeed, it's the Dresden Dolls at number 5, a band that were very synonymous with the underground movement of the mid-2000s. There was a lot of cabaret that was popping up, and most notably we saw that in A Fever You Can't Sweat Out by Panic at the Disco, an excellent album, but honestly, they of course were not the first to do that style. They had their influences and they even toured with the Dresden Dolls at one point, which I thought was kind of a cool crossover, but if you don't know the back to basics and just the oddities of this band, I highly recommend you go back and check out their self-titled and their album Yes Virginia. Dresden Dolls were such a weird experience for me because my friend Cameron found them on MySpace in the mid-2000s. He showed me their song Girl Anachronism, and we would often show this track to our friends just to get a reaction out of them because it was so weird with the kind of screamed vocals and the romping pianos at the beginning. For as oddball and borderline kind of creepy as the image of the Dresden Dolls may have been in the mid-2000s, I think they were kind of ahead of their time, but it was also interesting to see that they had a major record label backing them at Roadrunner. They saw success with those first 2 albums. There seemed to be a positive reaction to their live shows. It's just that that sound, it didn't hold in the mainstream. People quickly moved on to club and dance pop, and dark cabaret wasn't exactly in, and the band members found themselves moving on to new projects. Many of you might not remember Thursday by name, but you're sure as hell still feeling their impact on the post-hardcore music scene to this day. Their album Full Collapse, their sophomore release, really skyrocketed their fame, but they were quickly cut off at the heel as they were involved in a lengthy lawsuit with Victory Records that basically ensured that they would never earn money as a band for the rest of their career. Thursday are insanely talented. Their frontman Jeff Rickley has a very unique voice when it comes to singing and screaming. There's harsh elements, but they evolved their sound 100-fold over the years. By the time they got to their final album, No Devolution, in 2011, I was just blown away by the fact that they were not only still going, but still finding ways to innovate. Even after Thursday found a way to wiggle out of their contract with Victory, they kinda got screwed by the major label they switched over to, with their album A City by the Light Divided in 2006 in particular getting really under-promoted. I think it's a really strong offering despite it being a factor in the loudness war. The songs themselves are really good and it was actually my introduction to them. I think that Thursday still had a solid fan base, it's just that the general public weren't getting to know them because the label wouldn't put them out there with other bands like My Chemical Romance, who Jeff Rickley ironically kind of jump-started their career by producing their debut album Bullets. They've reunited several times over the years and are actually back together right now and slotted to play at Riot Fest 2021. Whether that happens or not is yet to be seen, but the verdict is out on Thursday as a band. They're incredibly underrated, they're often forgotten, but they're always resilient and always worth your time. Number 3 might just be the biggest hot take I have on the entire list because I know that this band have a dedicated following, it's just that now it's more of like a cult classic thing instead of like a mainstream point of view. You see, Phoenix are a French indie pop and rock band that I don't think ever wanted to make it that big, they just so happened to explode not only in their home country but worldwide in 2009 with the release of their 4th studio album, Wolfgang Amadeus Phoenix. aka WAP? I hate myself for letting my mind go to that dark place, but back to Phoenix, they had multiple hit singles from this album. You might know some of the more minor hits like Liz Mania or Lasso, both of which are great, but if you haven't heard this song... Well, if you didn't hear that one, I guess you didn't see a car commercial from 2009 to 2015, because this was inescapable. When I went back to their discography and listened to some of their older albums that released before Wolfgang, I was really pleasantly surprised to see how well these actually hold up. The songwriting, the hooks, they're incredibly catchy, but they're also well written. I appreciate the fact that the entire band gets involved in the process. You see, like I mentioned before, Phoenix, I never saw them as a band gunning for the spotlight. That's why they allowed it to fade by taking their time. You see, they could have followed up and capitalized on the success of Wolfgang, but they waited 4 years to put out Bankrupt, and then another 4 to put out Te Amo. Timing was definitely a factor if you ask me, because waiting to release those albums, it saw their name kinda getting swept under the rug a bit. Again, I know that Phoenix have a strong following, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. If you love their music, that's great. It's just that a lot of people, I think, have forgotten them.
If I go crazy, then will you still call me Superman?
Talk about sailing to the sun and then just crash landing into a volcano? That is the story of Three Doors Down, who landed in 2000 with their debut album that is 7 times platinum, The Better Life. They went from that to barely even cracking the top 40 with their most recent album in 2016. Three Doors Down were arguably the biggest rock band in the United States in the early to mid-2000s. They were not only charting on the rock and alternative charts, they crossed over to the mainstream. They had so many top 40 and even top 10 hits. This Superman level of success started with their first album and carried all the way through 2008 in the self-titled era. That was their last album that produced a top 40 hit with It's Not My Time. And now, how do they spend their time? I guess they play the inauguration for President Trump. That's your fucking legacy. Three Doors Down have not aged well. They have a few songs where I can be like, okay, I guess I have a soft spot for it. But really, we're gonna make Nickelback the most hated band of the 2000s? These guys deserve it way more. The super boring song structures, the lack of any kind of vocal enigma at all from their frontman, or really anything that strays outside of their very strict formula, it's not there. Look harder, look with the magnifying glass, you're not gonna find it. With so many monotonous guitars and lazy vocals that became much more apparent with how few ideas they actually had left the longer they went on as a band, it was clear that post-grunge as a movement was coming to a close, and a lot of that is thanks in part to Three Doors Down.
And I know it sounds so old, but Cupid got me in a chokehold, and I'm afraid I might give in.
What in the actual hell happened to Gym Class Heroes? They were huge, they were everywhere, they had top 40 hits on every single album it felt like, and then they just vanished into thin air? These guys had some genuinely dope ideas when it came to fusing together hip-hop, rock, and even pop hooks. They had some fascinating features early on in their career, with Patrick Stump from Fall Out Boy of course appearing on Cupid's Chokehold and a few other tracks. It was a good time for them, but then the albums, they started not exactly producing a net positive for the label fueled by ramen. The band members seemed to have disagreements over direction, leading to multiple hiatuses following their final album, The Paper Cut Chronicles 2. That released in 2011, and I think the biggest problem with Gym Class Hero as a unit, they started to really not stand out. They fell into all of these pitfalls, all of these cheesy moments. Travie McCoy as an MC, he started to get really unbearable, and his gimmicks that he pulled in his solo career, that was bleeding over to Gym Class Heroes big time, and their final album, despite having 3 top 40 singles on it, that's right, count them 3, they didn't actually push that album into the top 40 of the Billboard 200, and they broke up or else went on hiatus shortly after. I think Gym Class Heroes made the fatal mistake of relying way too heavily on guest features. You had Ryan Tedder from One Republic, Neon Hitch, Adam Levine from Maroon 5, Patrick Stump from Fall Out Boy. These are all names that eventually started clouding the waters to the point where the mainstream, they kind of forgot that Gym Class Heroes were a band, and they were thinking more about who sings the hook. thanks again to Dragon City for sponsoring this video. Use my custom link, the top one in the description down below, to download the game for free today on either iOS or Android. If you'd like to catch up on more SOS episodes, then tap this playlist right here, or tap here for another recent video on the channel. All of my socials, including my Patreon, can be found in the description down below, and I'll be back soon for more on ARTV.